So we kind of touched on this even through the questions today with Cloudera, as well as some of our discussions in the previous topic. I come from an enterprise world. I come from very traditional technologies, and I even predate the relational world. So now I'm seeing this transformation come a second time in my career. One of the things I notice when I go to NoSQL technology conferences or talk to vendors about any of these things, or Hadoop vendors, is that there's a frustration with how enterprise works, and it ranges anywhere from the fact that they're not all open source. They're still insisting on using their Windows technologies and solutions. They still have packages and applications that require Windows and other proprietary solutions. But it ranges all the way to, but they have all these onerous business processes. If you want to sell to a big conglomerate company, they insist on these things like purchase orders and RFPs and contracts and NDAs and all this stuff. What I wanted to open the topic to is, what is the difference between selling to enterprise customers, both the business and the IT side, as well as selling to, Stephen said cloud, we've said web scale, I'm just going to say the next big web company or the next big internet company. What's the difference selling to those?
Procurement.
That process, that big onerous process?
I think one of the bigger things is when you sell to the enterprise, it's almost you have to go through an entire business case.
Yeah.
Justification of why are you bringing it in, how much is it costing, and what am I actually going to save out of it? What am I getting from it?
When do I get my returns?
And one of the hardest things, for example, from a compliance project, for example, if you're selling in a compliance piece of software or something, is it's going to make you more compliant, and you're like, well, that's great, but it's not going to save me any money, and almost can't sell the justification of spending 2 million quid on saving 10 million if the regulator comes knocking on the door and finds you, because it may never happen. So that's a harder sell kind of sort of thing. So it's all about the business justification and the business value that you're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And that is the business case. And then you've got those procurement Rottweilers who will go through every contract with a fine-tooth comb, go through your company. Are you going to be around in the next 6 weeks, or are you going to fold? That kind of thing. Yeah. Whereas all these the next big web company, they're more agile, they're more open to, do you know what, this is the shit we need to get stuff done, and if it's going to help us get there, then I don't care. There's that kind of attitude, whereas the incumbents are still, it's like Jurassic Park versus the Jetsons.
But you see, I don't know. That's almost a fallacy, because when you see the website companies, they start out real small. One of the things you get, the larger your company becomes, right, is the fact that you have the baggage of heft with you. Yeah. So processes have to be defined. If not, everything is going to descend into anarchy. I mean, it's cumbersome when you're looking at it from the outside, or if when the processes run against you, but it's sort of necessary in order to keep the company running, because you do need those processes in place. If not, everybody's going to be procuring.
I think that's true to a degree, but there's a real danger, certainly in a number of enterprises, where the process becomes ossifying.
Yeah.
It's process for process's sake, rather than actually
bureaucracy.
It also the process, it gets to a stage where the processes exist, right, for somebody to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
Well, protection.
That's a job protection scheme, man.
At the same token, there's lots of small companies, startups, small companies who don't have that process and do incredibly stupid things.
Oh yes.
That having a process would prevent you. You know what? You should actually have accounts. It's a good idea to find out whether or not you're actually trading whilst insolvent.
What do you mean? Getting a funding round for 10 million and moving everybody to Hawaii is a bad idea?
Or only if you take the money with you.
Right.
And don't declare it to the IRS.
The first thing these smaller companies tend to do is hire for process is HR. I mean, accounting and HR. So they usually have some sort of accounting thing, even if it's QuickBooks. But they have something. But HR, and then legal, and they, all of those things have this what appears to be just horrible, heavy processes, and I have to deal with them all the time, so I know that's how they feel. One of the things I've noticed when I talk about these things with both traditional enterprise vendors and people who are new to it is the people who are new to it have never physically worked in an enterprise type shop ever in their lives. And so they've had zero exposure to the concept of, no, we don't just install software. We don't just tell our users to go download this and play with it. I mean, sometimes we can. But generally, if you've got 100,000 users all over the world, you have these onerous processes because it's cost you money in the past, or broken their other analytics system, or exposed all their data, or they've uploaded all their sensitive data up into the cloud for a trial. And that's why we have these processes. So we talked about risk in a business case. So risk is one of them. And I had said keeping your CIO out of jail is an important thing. That's what I call, that's the other definition of ROI. So not return on investment, but risk of incarceration. That's something that I do as part of my job, is try to keep the CIO out of jail to make sure that the data is protected and well loved and everything.
Well, one thing I was told once that really resonated with me was that this is not a problem to be solved, this is a situation to be managed. So having enough process is important, but not having too much process. And that amount of process level changes all the time. That's why it's hard. That's why you can, you'll have someone defraud the company, and then you'll suddenly put in all of these extra checks and balances to make sure it never happens, which then slows everything down.
Yeah.
You've kind of overcorrected. So it's a really tricky thing to figure out where is the right amount of process that we need to have, particularly if you are growing quickly or indeed going the other way. You know, if sales fall, maybe you should actually get rid of some of these processes that you have that's preventing sales from going back up again.
So why is it then that a lot of companies tend to go open source? I mean, younger companies in terms of companies targeting the web. Is it because the web?
Because it's free and they haven't got any money.
It's free and they have time.
It's the level of cost to get to market.
The barrier to entry.
I mean, I've worked at some of those companies too, where we ran as little of a major license footprint like Microsoft servers as we could, run them as small as we could, and then we had Linux machines running for as much as we could there, and exacerbated our savings in that space, and then even standing up software products on Hadoop, not only to you, just because we didn't want to go to that higher spending level with the enterprise licenses that we maybe needed, and to use SQL Server. Well, we could stand up something in the open source world with just some more work, but less capital.
And they already have some familiarity with the tools as well. A small startup, they've probably played with MySQL or used it for real.
Yeah.
If they're just out of college, they've never seen Oracle.
That's right.
They've heard of it. They know it's big and powerful and amazing,
And
what all the big
expensive.
companies have, but they have no access to it.
Yes.
There's the risk aspect as well. So open source has always had that perception of being riskier to use, unsupported, something can go wrong. And so for big incumbents, it's a big red flag. It's unwarranted, but it's a big red flag, and they're not prepared to take the risk. Whereas younger companies are more inclined, I would think, to take that risk, play with it, and hopefully accelerate with it.
It's a different risk. For them, it's a bigger risk to have that much cash burn to go and buy all of this, and particularly, it's the same reason AWS is really popular. It's like, I don't have to buy servers, because if this project doesn't work out or this thing doesn't work out, A, I've deferred the spending till later, and B, if I decide I don't need the server, Dell isn't going to take it back, because it's used now. So whereas if I want to stop using AWS, I just turn it off.
Plus AWS is an expense because it's operational and not necessarily something you have to capitalize and that you're bought into.
Yeah, which is less of a problem in small companies, but
that's
depending
what I mean.
on whether it's just cash flow more than OPEX, CAPEX stuff.
But they can't
some
turn their
companies
server
worry
off
about
and
it.
get more money in their cash flow.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
That.
Yeah, that.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I notice is that one of the big mistakes I see all the time when these newer tech companies come in is they do their regular pitch of why Relational has failed us, why queries are 20 pages long, why your transactional database is horrible to query because you have to do a 6-table join. And yet, that's a completely different story. Like, they shouldn't be competing with your point of sale relational database as much as all of your analytics, your consumable based, consuming data and analyzing data. And I think that's a false sort of sales pitch. And the people in your room have been investing $100 million a year into their existing systems, and you just came in and told them they were all stupid and wasting their money.
Yep.
Now, sometimes that's a great sales pitch, and other times it's not.
It's rarely a good idea to tell your customer they're stupid.
So,
morons.
relational databases are not going anywhere.
Well, and
Someday.
They work, they're really
might.
useful.
and having that discussion with the client, it's not always, it's not that you're necessarily standing there saying that, you're dumb. It's painting the portrait, and how it goes depends on whose idea it was.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you know that as well as I do.
Yeah.
You go in the room, and if it was the wrong person's idea to, go down that road, it's a very uncomfortable conversation, or a very short one.
So sort of getting back to what we were talking about originally, like the difference in selling is partly process, but it's also the people. It's like if you're talking to a smaller company, you can talk to the decision maker like
Yes.
straight away. And then you can figure out very quickly, or they can figure out, do I want to have a relationship with this person? Do I want to buy it? Does it sound like a good deal? Whereas on another thing, you've got, and there's whole sales books written about it, about the buying center, and having to find out, who are the influencers, and can you get an internal supporter to come and figure out whether, yes, this is a good thing, we think you should buy it, because they're trying to make a decision with imperfect knowledge, because they don't know everything about what you are, and they're trying to figure that out. But there's more people that they have to get to agree to say yes. So, whereas no is easy.
Ultimately, as you look at people who have more SaaS models, like Box or something like that, and you see their sales and marketing expenses rise, anytime you're asking a company for a lot of money, there's going to be a lot of sales motion involved and a lot of people who have to approve, and that.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of those SaaS things succeeded really well, because they brought the amount of approved spending way down to, I'm authorized to spend that, I can expense that on my card.
I will say, as a startup, there are a crazy number of super cheap services you can take advantage of for like $100 a year or a month.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But I mean, it's an interesting point actually about SaaS and the cost of sales and marketing, and the ongoing cost of sales and marketing. It's a very good way to get started, both building a company, but also, as a consumer of those products. You do kind of wonder, looking at the figures coming out of companies like Salesforce that have been in this space for a very long time, their sales and their marketing spend continues to grow faster than their revenue.
Sure.
How long is this going to continue? Is a wholly SaaS-based model actually a defensible business model for the long term?
If you don't own the underlying infrastructure, that's going to be a struggle. I mean, it's
Not if the infrastructure is of no value. Having someone, like, there are lots of companies who don't own the building they're in, they rent it, because it's a building, no one cares.
yeah, but that's totally different from building in somebody else's space. You don't think
Only
that?
if you can't leave. Because like in the building I can move out and go somewhere else. It costs me money to do that, but I can still do it. Whereas if you build, say, all of your game apps on Facebook, where are you going to go? That's where all your customers are. And if you want to move anywhere, they're going to come with you? No.
Zynga.
Exactly. So,
It's funny.
But if you look at like a Box
Yep.
or Dropbox that don't actually own the underlying storage infrastructure,
That's okay.
They're probably gonna have issues down the road. I mean, because no matter how fast they run, once they stop being the flavor of the day, right? Because there's always something new. At the end of the day, the underlying infrastructure they've built their house on belongs to somebody else, even if it's
no, that's
Amazon Blob or
That's why
contracting.
Microsoft's file storage system is just tearing it up.
what? What do you mean?
Getting better.
But that's a contracting issue. That's whether or not you've got the right contracts in place to make sure that you've got service levels and other things. Because that's renting some underlying stuff is like having a building. So whether or not you've made a good strategic choice of partner for that. I've got an entire, I've bought only EMC or only IBM forever. It's like, yeah, I can move to something else, but it's going to cost me money. How much is it going to cost me to move? Well, did I make a strategic error in doing it? So versus, is it impossible for me to actually move it there? Well, no, it's just difficult. So am I going to have to move? Well, just make sure that you never have to move.
It's difficult, but it doesn't. I don't know.
So I'm not.
I don't know. They don't seem to be.
Zynga, as you mentioned, there is actually a really good example. Started off on AWS, decided they could do it themselves cheaper and better, and now are just in the process of recognizing that possibly they made the wrong decision, and they're migrating large parts of that back out of their own data center, back onto AWS.
I don't think we know enough detail about.
We don't.
Exactly what
don't
that
know
is,
all
so
the detail about what's going on there.
It's a fancy headline. I'd be surprised if running base load in AWS would be cheaper than buying servers and doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Unless you were doing some really strange things and didn't actually know anything about running a data center, which is quite possible.
But Zynga involves creatives, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the IP is in creating creative work, so to speak. What's the name? The storage companies that utilize blobs, right? They're not like that. I mean, they're just renting space, right? Huge space.
Here's an analogy I think is slightly closer to what you're saying. So imagine that you've built a business that is entirely in Congo or Zaire or somewhere in Africa, and there's a coup, and you decide you have to leave. All your customers are there. What are you going to do? I think it's a little bit more like that, because it's just dirt, but being able to move away, it's not the dirt that's the problem, it's where your customers are that's the problem, because they're the ones who will give you money.
I'm not looking at that. That's not a fair analogy.
No?
So you have Box, right, that rents storage
Yeah.
to other people on space that they're renting from
Amazon.
Amazon.
But
Like
that's
the sublet
what
sort of-
banks do.
Okay, but
They get money from one person and then they loan it out to someone else, and then they charge a premium in the middle. That's it.
yeah,
They're a data
Subletting
bank.
an
So are you
apartment.
saying it's not really a commodity, all this cloud storage?
it is a commodity. I don't.
Well, if it's a commodity, then it
Then
can go
it's
anywhere.
And Box
arbitrage.
aren't
And-
just reselling cloud storage; they're layering services on top of it, which goes back to the previous conversation. So it's not just about where your files live.
So Box is a bank, basically.
I still don't see it. I don't know. I won't invest in it though. I don't know.
So are there any other differences, any things that you've seen between selling to enterprise and selling to the next web scale success story?
Yeah, the enterprise guys are older.
Yeah, yes we are. Grumpy, old.
You have to be able to have that conversation about security.
That's the tough one, yeah. And
Yeah, I mean, you
compliance
can't.
and-
I mean, the granularity of security at a 15-person or 50 or 100-person startup, the granularity of security there is not as deep as you need to go for your larger enterprise with,
Unless those-
thousands of employees.
Unless that 15-person company is building a web app that has 6 million users putting their data in there.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not the number of employees that
Yeah,
matters.
not necessarily.
It's not the
Yeah.
I
only
mean, if you're
scale
looking at their
measure.
internal
It's the data
database,
story
yeah.
behind it all.
Yeah.
and everything. Yeah. I think the other thing is that it's that, again, what I just keep coming back to is a non-enterprise person, someone who's had no exposure to it, trying to sell into an enterprise is just confused by all those processes and terminology, and has also heard about relational or traditional technologies, in the hallways at school. They've never played with it. They've heard that relational databases can't scale beyond 1 gigabyte, and that relational databases can't do joins beyond 5 or 6 tables, and and it's really hard to bring those two worlds together so that we can say, oh yes, this is a great solution for our business case, and work on that together.
And because a lot of those preconceived notions, it's hard to get those two sides to even talk
Yeah.
together, to be comfortable, to be across the table or even in the same room.
Yeah, I think
Does the reverse also work? Or does it have issues as well? Somebody who's well steeped in selling to the enterprise, talking to a small startup that probably
Oh, yeah.
targets as many.
Yeah, same problem because
the same
it's
problem.
translation
Yeah.
problem.
First of all,
Yeah.
that guy's going to wear a suit, and they're not going to take him serious at all.
Yeah.
They're gonna laugh at them, yeah. And also the enterprise is going to look at the other side of the table and go, wow, they're really loose, and your enterprise is usually steeped in like a waterfall methodology, even from the project standpoint, whereas the startups tend to be more agile. So that right there is, well, no, I need to have my requirements before I go to,
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
Can I? I'm going to jump in here and possibly blow the whole thing up, because I remember seeing a survey and I've just found it, and it stuck out on Twitter as well because it's part of a slide share. But this company Black Duck surveyed 1,300 corporations, and 78% came back and said yes, open source is embedded in our IT operations as a daily thing.
Yeah.
93% said their orgs use open source has increased in the last year.
Absolutely.
When evaluating security technologies, for example, here's another one, 45% of them said the open source options are given first consideration. So perhaps even our perceptions are slightly antiquated, I would say, because we're driven by the old perception about open source, but it does seem that there are more companies out there embracing it.
Oh, definitely.
And getting past
like Linux, Apache, Tomcat, all of those things. Those were the first, and they got there because they became enterprise ready.
Yeah.
They added the features. I think if I tie it back to the data things, that's where I'm seeing, we want you to rip out your SQL Server and replace it with this. That's not their next few. You're going to build a few web servers that run Linux and Tomcat, and that's a completely different. They're talking about replacing applications, line of business applications, not just the infrastructure that's under it. And I think that's part of the difference. So you're right. I think enterprise has embraced open source and are using it in a lot of places. I just don't know if it's the same sort of places that we're dealing with this week.
Yeah.
Well, that could just mean, we have Linux servers.
That's what I said, Linux and...
Yeah, I've had to squeeze that in, so citation needed.
Yeah.
Like, okay, great. 74%
Also,
of statistics
I
are
need
made
to
up
know
on
their
the spot.
sample set.
Yeah, sample size and all that sort of stuff.
No, the set.
And that could be, it's like, what was the question they asked and so on. It's like, okay, great, we're running Linux, awesome. I'm running open source because I have an Android phone. Does that count?
I have Mozilla.
Is that
something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm running Chrome as my browser.
Yeah, Chrome.
It's kind of hard to find somebody who's not running something that's open source. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a Mozilla browser on mine.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So in that, it's like 78% of companies is like, okay, but
I bet it's higher
so-
than that.
And a lot of people run
if
Linux
it's just
servers.
Chrome or if it's just Android,
78% of companies are
that matter?
running open source because they're running Chrome because they've had issues with other browsers that lock up and stuff.
So if you've got one product, does that mean that your business has some open source? Yeah. So it's like, I'd rather say a percentage of companies have this % of their IT running open source
I'd
stuff.
want to know it
It's
by part of their IT
Are they running
infrastructure
mission critical applications?
that are based on and
it.
which open source thing. So,
Yeah.
and the other thing is there could be a little bit of Hawthorne effect there, where it's like, yeah, we're cool, we got big data, we got open source, or the other big fallacy of, we're installed in 93% of all Fortune 500
And
companies.
so are all your competitors.
Yeah, all your competitors and.
Well, that's the thing. That's one thing about big companies is that they do tend to have one of everything. Sometimes
Yes.
4
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
that they don't use because
And they
someone
bought
bought
them
it
4
once.
times
Yeah.
because one side didn't know they were
Yeah,
buying.
and it's sitting in a drawer because
That's a good
that
one.
project got cancelled
Yep.
before we could implement it. So,
Yep.
yeah. So that was something I was thinking before. Is like an enterprise company is likely to be older because you don't turn into an enterprise company
Yep.
in 2 days. Almost never. Like even if you're a high growth startup with insane growth thing,
Yeah.
you're still not an enterprise. I mean, it's like what would actually define enterprise, which is tricky.
Right.
Like we kind of intuitively know what it is, but
The old stodgy process-heavy
where's the line between we're an enterprise now? It's like when did that happen? So it's kind of a diffuse relationship. But age, I think, is one of them. So you'll get older people working there because, well, if you started there and it's a 12-year-old company, it's like, well, you're going to be likely to be 12 years older than someone who just joined a new startup.
And how do we get past this idea as well that the words we've been using for enterprise, old, stodgy, hidebound, actually safe, secure, dependable, trustworthy,
Sustainable.
You know, this is- yeah.
Well,
So the whole innovation only happens in small, shiny companies is a total myth.
Yes.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, big companies innovate all the time.
Yes.
You know, so it's kind of like, oh, it's, you know, bad and new, only the new shiny is any good. It's like, actually, it's the opposite.
It can be.
even IBM
can
comes
be,
up
yeah.
with something unique every once in a while.
Yeah, but I mean,
kind of
it just in general, new stuff is built by large companies all the time.
Yes.
Like 3M, for example. You know, IBM invents new stuff all the time.
But even,
Sometimes they don't
you know,
sell
the
it very well,
stodgiest
but-
of industries, retail, I mean, the innovations that happen at Best Buy with data and IT and the retail experience, and Walmart, who is probably the most conservative business,
Fine.
but also innovates like crazy to get that competitive advantage because their margins are so low.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Right?